We are here, we are live, and we are doing this with RC Apologists live with Theological Discussion, the show where, we have those theological discussions, and that was a new song that we are trying out. It's called Faith, Not Sight by Chad James Pardue. Found it on a Bandcamp, and was hoping to see if I could see if there's some good music from the guy to come on later on. But apparently not. Made one album and has been, I think, 2 or 3 years haven't been used. So, anyways, we are here and we're going to be doing an interesting episode of Theological Discussion where we will be going over 2 videos. And I gotta make sure to link them whenever we're done with this in the description. But anyways, let's go over what we're dealing with. So, first agenda on the list is going to be the guy who goes by the name of Godless Engineer, who has made a video trying to go against the doctrine of original sin, and there's several arguments about this that he's going to try to present and make, especially an interesting dialogue between a, I guess, quote, Christian, and they're trying to say that it's all on one person. So apparently there's got to be a false dichotomy in his understanding of the text or his treatment of the text. Alright. So, let me, first things first, let me just delete that and get ourselves uploaded on. Okay, also get the Bible software loaded. So let me first load that real quick. It'll be dark on the screen for a bit until it pops up. Okay, we're almost there. We've completely loaded it there. Now we just need to wait for it to show up on screen. And boom. It has done so there. Alright. So we got that taken care of. Now let's head on over to the video. Alright, so here it is. Who is actually responsible for original sin? Bible questions by none other than Godless Engineer. If you hear me walking in the distance, that's because I am getting myself a little bit of water, because I am getting to a point, it seems, now that I'm starting to notice, where the more I try to talk or something, the more dehydrated I'm starting to get. And not just dehydrated, like my throat's starting to get a little more rough. And it's not very good for me at all. So hopefully that gets resolved and taken care of. But anyways, we're going to see what Godless Engineer has to say in this video on who is actually responsible. And mind you, there's going to be language in it, so if you're young or whatever and you're tuning in, please keep in mind that this is not for young audiences. So that being said, let's listen to what we have, and we're not going to put it on the quick one because it is a short video, and we're going to just deal with them piece by piece before we get to the next video. So that being said, let's go ahead and get it on over with.
What's up, heathens? How ya doing? Today we're going to be looking into who is actually responsible for original sin.
Wait a second. There's no doubt who's responsible.
I agree.
That bitch
bastard
Eve.
Adam. What?
Fucking traitor.
So with the depiction that has been given so far, this individual that was on the left there, only way that could work is if you're a MGTOW, quote, Christian, that tries to put some kind of superiority over men. Hence, I think the term of traitor or something that's being used there. But anyways.
So, don't listen to Brocephus on this topic because...
Hold on now, dipshit. I have reasons and stuff in order to be saying the shit that I'm saying. Just look at 1 Timothy 2:14. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. This was written by Paul himself, okay? It was one of the epistles. Are you trying to say that you know more about Christian theology than fucking Paul?
No, but what I am saying is that is a forged epistle, so that's not actually what Paul wrote.
Okay, so we're gonna let him explain, but this is where essentially the argument it gets to, and why he tries to specifically say it must there be Adam, is because he believes that First Timothy is a forgery, and we'll get into that in a bit, and why it's not a forgery based on the actual evidence of it within the text of the pastoral epistles. Make sure we have ourselves ready to turn there, because we got, of course, ourselves some people like William Barclay on this matter. So, that being said, let's hear what the actual argumentation is, or the case for it not being Pauline and authorship is. Let's hear this.
And it's this exact kind of verse that gives us the indication that this was not written by Paul. The misogynistic nature of it is totally antithetical to everything else written by Paul.
Okay, so let me just go here for a second. Okay, so let me just get this straight, because this is ranting time. Misogynistic nature is the reason why, for some odd reason, it is not Pauline and authorship? I mean, I okay, we're gonna get to something else about that in a bit, concerning how he's actually inconsistent, and how then his whole point then just gets destroyed out of the whole water at that point. But let's go over this. Where, in terms of the academia or any of the examination, has people focused on the whole thing here about the concept of it being Pauline and authorship is attributed on, is he sexist or is he strong towards women? There's just nowhere in this text that would indicate such a thing concerning, or nowhere in any of this kind of scholarly academic pursuit that would consider that to be a motif, because that's a very subjective way of looking at things. To try to suggest, for example, to try to say that, well, you know, he was sexist in what sense, because by that point you could just say the entire New Testament is sexist, much like how a lot of people have been trying to claim it is sexist on multiple grounds. In fact, we'll get into one of those reasons in a bit. But that is not a legitimate reason to suggest that it's not Pauline and...
Whatever, you fucking nerd. The Bible doesn't lie, and the first verse says that Paul wrote this sumbitch to some fuck named Tim.
That too. So there's that to consider, unless of course you can prove from actual data, which hasn't been demonstrated, that, you know, Paul wrote this. You gotta prove he didn't do it, just like we've managed to have our case, including that one verse.
And since the Bible doesn't lie because the Bible says so, so it must have been written by Paul. Suck on that, dipshit.
Okay, well, let's look at what Paul actually wrote about original sin in Romans 5:12, which is an actual epistle that the author Paul actually wrote.
Wait, before we continue with this, let's consult the wonderful Bible. Let's consult Romans chapter... We have this the epistle here. So remember, according to our pal here, it seems that in order for it to not be considered a Pauline epistle and authorship, is it sexist or misogynistic? Well, as some people have pointed out, if we go to... Let me put on my Godless engineer reading glasses for a second so I could read it like that. There we go. Now, let's go over to Romans 1 and verse 27. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman. Okay, hold on a second. Women have a natural use. How dare they think of women as a natural use, or that there's this natural use of a woman, and the context in this is in reference to sex. How dare they? See, Romans 1:27 shows the sexism, the misogyny. Therefore, this was not written by Paul, even though it says it right here. So, according to his own logic, this was not written by Paul. But I digress. Let's actually focus on the context of what's being addressed, and knowing that this was written by Paul, just like 1 Timothy was written by Paul, let's actually get to his whole point.
Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. So actually, Paul totes blames Adam for original sin.
Oh, come on, man. That ain't fair, and you know it.
What? Why?
Okay, see, here's when I totally started giving up on this one. Is by the time it says, "Oh, that ain't fair," no legit Christian is seriously gonna just say something like that. Just say, "Oh, come on," concerning the issue of the blame and all that. Yeah, that ain't fair, you know it. And also concerning Theistic Logos, who's saying which verse is he saying is sexist and that makes it therefore no longer Paul's thing. It's in reference to 1 Timothy 2:14, where he thinks that because of this language that it's misogynistic or sexist, therefore it means it was not written by Paul, because sexist or misogynistic language is not in Paul's vocabulary or linguistic style, so therefore we don't take it as being something he wrote. So, trying to continue onward with the video.
Why? Did he not eat the fruit as well?
Yeah, but, I mean, you know how convincing the women's are. If she hadn't of...
Look, it's not Eve's fault that Adam's a dipshit, okay? How about Adam actually take some responsibility for his own shitty actions?
And both tried to get away with it, and both are responsible. Both are to be held and blamed for original sin. Both are in that. The only reason why concerning the issue of original sin and why it gets addressed there is, number one, because of the issue of the federal headship theology. And then, of course, we have the thing about Eve with regards to why she then gets that blame is because she is the one that took the sin first and then tempted Adam. So, in all honesty, both are to blame. It's just in concerns of federal headship. That's where we can see where Adam gets involved in that, because he is then represented in that federal head, just like Christ would be the federal representative in our federal head.
Go fuck yourself. I'm out of here before God thinks I'm eating this forbidden fruit shit. Bye, you goddamn heathens.
Okay. The official Christian stance is that Adam is the one to blame for original sin. This is because God made him the leader, or made him for the leadership role, while Eve was just like a helpmeet or whatever the fuck for Adam. Therefore, Adam's sin was actually much greater than Eve's sin. This is a bit of doublespeak, though, when you consider the entire theology of Christianity. Because in the same breath, some Christians will say that Eve and Adam were made equals by God. Yet Eve is not also considered a leader? And because she's not a leader...
People can be considered leaders in their own rights and their own perspectives. The only thing is that Adam is a leader in terms of a federal headship, and women have different roles and they have different things like that. If you want to say that whole thing by that kind of standard, if y'all want to be ones that were promoting equality in this kind of sense, then by that own reasoning and standard, let's say women and men bathrooms. Why distinct gender bathrooms? Why not, and let me just put this on so I can have this banner here. Why not just do something where you now have men and women using the same exact bathroom? I guarantee if you want to be consistent concerning the whole thing, you'll be saying, hey, let me use the same bathroom as the woman, or if the woman says, let me use the same bathroom as the man. And if you say no to the woman, well, how dare you try to think I'm not equal or, fit to share the same bathroom with you, kind of thing. I mean, they could even then try to start going to the same thing about the color division between bathroom with the white bathroom and the black bathroom concerning the old days of the civil rights era, and now trying to make the same kind of case. So again, the whole issue about the equality here isn't necessarily always about the leadership thing. It's that they're both human beings, both deserve rights, both are made in the image of God. That's the equality. All right, so continuing on.
Later, that means that her sin is less egregious. This doesn't really sound like equality to me. This also contradicts the notion that in the eyes of God, all sin is equal. Another defense of this
how concerning the issue, like a sin is a sin, concerning a greater or lesser sin, because here's the thing, I keep hearing greater or lesser sin. I don't see where it says that one is a greater sin than the other or a lesser sin than the other. The only one that really gets this is the unforgivable sin, and concerning that has its own particular rank. But everything else, this greater and lesser sin kind of theology is mostly something created by Roman Catholics and others that try to make things seem by their own system not as bad, but still can call it sin by technical definition, though this is problematic and is inconsistent with biblical Christianity and historical doctrine within the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century of the church. So let's continue.
Contradiction is that Adam was not deceived by Eve or the snake, making his sin a lot less serious than Eve's sin. This is also confusing, not only because of the aforementioned reasons here, but because how is Adam supposed to know it was good or bad to disobey God when he had yet eaten from the tree of knowledge? Also, was Eve deceived by the snake? I mean, the snake does convince her to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, but, I mean, doesn't saying that she got deceived sort of take away some of the responsibility of her making that decision?
Not necessarily, no. Not at all.
Is she not responsible for her actions? Are all men responsible for the actions of women?
They are responsible for their own actions, man or woman. They are all to be held accountable for their actions, regardless. So Eve and Adam both are accountable. Hence why both that passage in Romans 5:12 and that passage that we read about in 1 Timothy, both are true. Both from Paul, both are right.
Hell yes, she's responsible. It's the women's damn fault that we're even in this fucking situation right now. The moral of this entire original sin story is that women are to blame for everything, and
like that, I'm done with that one. It's done to the point that you might as well be like we might as well have like him trying to just impersonate. Like, it would be, what this is essentially like if I was to be like, to dress up like a Godless engineer or any other atheist on here and start spouting off things like shock of God. Like saying, don't you know we atheists have evidence that atheism is accurate and correct? We can disprove things that don't exist by showing they exist and then disproving existence. Like, I could try this whole kind of thing, but it is dishonest and honestly just don't know what the point of that would be unless I'm addressing a specific kind of people. But it seems based off of the title and based off of the content, this seems to be an objection or a claim against Christians in general, and thus this is supposed to be the general Christian representative, which I have yet to meet a single Christian that makes any kinds of arguments like those in any way, shape, or form. So, Godless needs to really work up on his game there. Now, I've been saying that some guy been trying to keep just tagging me, whatever this name of his is in the Arabic. Says, where is original sin in the Bible? I don't see it, hence it doesn't exist. Actually, original sin is in the Bible. And in fact, I'll leave in the live chat a link to an article that shows the biblical evidence for original sin. And who knows, this might address some of the other questions, because he says chapter and verse says man inherits original sin, which of course, again, you're not going to get those specific exact words. Concerning federal headship, there is the concept of in Adam all died. That's federal headship. And then in Christ all shall be made alive. That's the federal headship there. That's what it is and what it's teaching. So there you have it right there. So let's see. Before we move on to the next one, let's see. Okay, we don't have much else then to touch with concerning response to other people, because everyone's at that point's just been making a. Okay. It takes the thing off. It won't let me like do any like looking into. All right, so here's the next video we're going to be taking a look at, and we are skipping that. All right. Because I don't want to have any like on-screen content for a few seconds during like some ads. All right, so the next one's going to be from Inspiring Philosophy, and this video, we're not going to watch the whole thing. We're just going to pretty much just kind of get into it a little bit, because there was just a part of it that I saw that really was addressed to me in the Discord, and someone had pointed out, you know, when I made suggestions, hey, anyone want to suggest something for the show? And so I took a look, and someone said, hey, what about Inspiring Philosophy's video where he says Adam wasn't made from the rib and Eve wasn't made from, or no, Adam wasn't made from the dust and Eve wasn't made from the rib. And I see on the Discord from a guy named No, but I'm Nunu. Says he doesn't have an accent in his theological discussions, but he does when he preaches. It's simple. It's called whenever a certain attitude or a certain kind of extent gets out, then that's when it happens. It happens sometimes on here. Maybe if you would watch more of these, then you would actually figure this out. So sometimes the accent comes on, and then sometimes it doesn't. So it all really depends, depending on the atmosphere, and number two, the attitude that I happen to be in. So, by the way, for context for some of those that are trying to figure out what's going on there, and let me put the theological discussion banner back on since we're not looking at the video just yet. Apparently, a bunch of the Steven Andersonites, Steven Anderson fanboys, are claiming that like I'm a fake Southern Baptist or something like that, because they say, look at how he sounds in the pulpit, but he sounds different in the on the internet. He's faking it or something like that. So it's really ridiculous, and just shows that these people have no life and no sound doctrine. So hence the only reason they want to go out and do something is just to simply attack a certain individual based off of their own preference and tone, I guess. I have no idea. I mean, if you want me to start getting all Southern and start getting a little bit out there and start getting my accent out there, then hey, I'm more than welcome to do that. But right now I haven't talked for a bit, so my throat's a little kind of out today. And it's also nighttime, so I'm trying to do some bit of a courtesy to my neighbors, because I live in a trailer park and walls aren't exactly thick, so a lot of things can be heard at the time. So yes, even my neighbors are gonna, if they're outside, they're probably gonna hear me talking and ranting on this whole thing here. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at the video. Let me go play it. So here it is, where Inspiring Philosophy apparently said Adam was not made from the dust and Eve wasn't made from the rib or the side of Adam. And let's get into this. Oh wait, hold up. There we go.
Ancient Near Eastern texts. Human creation was described in archetypal ways to explain all of humanity's relation to their deities and with each other. Genesis specifically does this in Hebrew with the names Adam and Eve. There is direct wordplay to show archetypal nature. Adam, which means man in Hebrew, is given the name specifically because he is an archetype for all humans, and wordplay is used because he is connected to the ground, Adame. Woman, Isha, is wordplay on Ish, which means man, because Isha was taken from Ish. This doesn't directly mean Adam and Eve were not real people. I've already argued I think they were real people.
So I want y'all to note that one statement doesn't mean they weren't real people and that he's argued that they are real people. This is what comes to bite him much later on. Much later on. And also I see some guy in the chat saying, I'm not a Southern Baptist, I'm a Presbyterian Paedo-Baptist, even though I have spoken out against Paedo-baptism and in church and affirm believers' baptism. So, again, just shows that this guy does not know what he's talking about. Anyways, continuing onward, this point is going to kind of refute what Inspiring Philosophy says later. So in other words, I'm using Inspiring Philosophy a bit to refute what Inspiring Philosophy says, as well as the other scholars that we're going to have on board on our thing, including this commentary from Kenneth A. Matthews and this one particular work from the several scholars led by Miles Van Pelt, which is A Biblical Theological Introduction to the New Testament, or to the Old Testament. Sorry. I was looking at the other one, the New Testament one earlier. So, that being said, let's take a look and listen at what Inspiring Philosophy's got to say. Oh, wait. Press the wrong button on the wrong thing.
And the real first priest and priestess of creation that stood in the first temple before God. This is just to note that how they are described, with their given names and ingredients, was meant to teach theological and relational importance, not scientific truths.
Okay, so concerning the whole thing, and I would agree, it's not meant to relay anything scientific like that. I would say that what we're seeing here is instead more so of a theological thing, but at the same time, I don't think that means therefore what's happening hasn't really happened, or it was never happened in history. I think that Adam made from dust or ground is something that happened, and that same thing applies to this whole thing with Eve. So let's listen more.
As John Walton says, in summary then, there are both differences and similarities between ancient Near Eastern and Israelite presentations of the archetypal humans. Ancient Near Eastern texts speak of a collective archetype that is connected to deity by being made of divine ingredients, that does corvée labor for the gods. The Old Testament speaks of archetypes consisting of a human couple who portray the connection of male and female by the manner of the female's origin and their connection to the ground in death by their ingredients. They are connected to deity in their role only, not by their ingredients. In other words, ancient Near Eastern texts use ingredients as metaphors or archetypes to describe roles and connections between humans and God. Materials are mentioned for their archetypal significance. This is obvious when we read that the marriage union is described as one flesh. We understand this as a metaphor, not a literal flesh bond. Likewise, when we see how Eve was made...
So first of all, we can understand that based on the text and its context in the way that it is being applied. And we can also keep reading to see that because they are able to go separate ways, even after being made one flesh, that's not a literal thing there. So it's even just looking into the text itself. Now, does then this mean that, with what we just heard earlier, the concept of Adam being made from the ground and Eve made from the rib or the side, that's somehow an archetype? Yes, that's an archetype. Does that mean it's not literal? Doesn't mean that. It means that it's definitely literal based on context and other passages that we're going to go into that point this out. So let's take a listen more at what the case is on Eve first.
We can also understand the archetypal relation. Despite the way the English reads, the Hebrew word for rib is not in Genesis 2. So it is inaccurate to say Genesis 2 teaches Eve was made from a rib. This should be obvious when we read Adam's first words, when he sees her. He says, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Obviously, Eve was more than just bone. If this was an account of material origins of humanity, this would create a contradiction in the English, because Eve would only have been made from bone, not bone and flesh. What is actually taken from Adam to make Eve is a selah. The word typically means the entire side of something, like the side of a hill, one side of the ark, or side chambers in a temple.
Now, and I agree that just referred to a side, and in fact, we're not going to use because the King James one definitely will use rib and all that. So let's go over to what one translation that I'm sure Inspiring Philosophy would be familiar with and probably uses is the John Golden Gay's First Testament. It's a translation done entirely by the scholar John Golden Gay. And when we go to the passage in question, we go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 21. Well, but this is interesting, because this is actually not something that you normally would hear from a scholar like him. So Yahweh God made a coma fall on the human being, so he slept, took one of his ribs, in plural, and closed up its place with flesh. So that's an interesting perception that I didn't think was going to happen. So even now I'm getting shocked. So let's go back. Then let's go over here in Genesis chapter 2. In the commentary by Kenneth Matthews. And concerning this, we read... all right, let's see here. All right. As we observe the language, and this is page 216 of the New American Commentary on Genesis 1 to 11:26 from Kenneth A. Matthews. Right. The language of the garden scene is found in the tabernacle description. The term selah, here rendered ribs, appears frequently in the construction setting of the tabernacle, there translated side. And in the footnote, it mentions the issue of, as is pointed out in some of this part of the video, the several times where it is translated as side, and in its whole structure. It also appears frequently in the construction of Solomon's temple and Ezekiel's vision of a new temple. There is some dispute regarding the precise sense of this Hebrew word in our passage. The NIV text note here indicates that the Hebrew can be translated part of man's side. So it could say part of man's side. But then this Hebrew word, meaning one, suggests that a single rib is meant concerning verse 21. So the issue then is it a rib? Is it a side? Well, for sake of argument, we're just going to go with side in light of the argument compared to, even though Golden Gay, Matthews, and I'm pretty sure Currid on the Biblical Theological Introduction to the Old Testament would probably say rib. Either way, let's just say side for the sake of argument and see where we go from there.
Even the Akkadian cognate is ambiguous, and rarely does it refer to a single rib, but more refers to the side of someone. Zion Zevitz says, disassociating selah from rib has strong philological support. In biblical Hebrew, selah is employed to refer to a number of different items: the sides of a structure, chambers or rooms extending from the side of another structure, wooden planks or support beams, the side of a hill. In fact, The only place in biblical Hebrew where it may refer to skeletal ribs is in the Genesis passages. Its Akkadian cognate, selu, means rib, side, lateral wing of a building, and by extension, direction. Its Ge'ez cognate, sele, means only tablet or beam. All these nouns refer to pluric structures. On the basis of that, the text would be saying Adam was cut in half, and with one side, Eve was made. So when God closed up the flesh on Adam, was he just half a body hopping around on one leg? However, if we focus on what happened prior to this, it sheds light on what the text is actually trying to say. The text says Adam was put into a deep sleep. However, Michael Fox notes, this is typically not ordinary sleep. The word typically means a type of sleep that blocks all awareness of the physical world. So it is often used for someone who is about to receive a vision from God. Based on this, what follows after Adam is put into a deep sleep is something he saw in a vision that God gave him. Namely, he saw himself being divided in half and realized the other half of him was the woman, and he was incomplete without her at his side. The priestly work in the garden cannot be performed properly if there is not a woman there working it with the man.
Alright, so perfect place to stop there. Now, let me just point this out. Okay, so what we've just heard saying, like, I don't agree with, or don't understand how Michael, that particular scholar, that Dr. Fox, how he came to that conclusion. And in fact, when I was trying to look into that from it, I did look into the commentary I got from Matthews, and according to Matthews' work, he doesn't define deep sleep, which is todema, to mean that. In fact, let's read what he has to say on page 216. Third, the narration indicates by the method of making the... Hold up, let me put this back on here. Okay. The narration indicates by the method of making the woman that she is a special creation in the eyes of God. She is taken from the man by a surgical act of God. The deep sleep, tardema, that Adam experiences and the procedure that follows is initiated and carried out exclusively by God. The man is not even a conscious spectator. The sleep preserves for the man the mystery of her creation and the subsequent surprise at her appearance. Deep sleep is commonly used of a night's sleep, Job 4:13, 33 verse 15, Proverbs 19:15. But here it is the special work of God, as with Abraham's slumber. Abraham is seen in chapter 15 verse 12 and 1 Samuel 26:12, and figuratively use Isaiah 29:10 with Romans 11:8. So let's take a look at some of these examples. So let's go to the online Bible, and we're going to take a look into Genesis 15:12. 15:12. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and lo, and horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abraham, Know of surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. So there's a deep sleep that is going on down here. And as even John Gill, the commentator, notes, through the great fatigue he had the preceding day. So he had deep sleep because of the great fatigue he had the preceding day in doing what is before related, or rather through a more than ordinary influence of God upon him, which bound up his senses and cast him into an ecstasy or trance, when he had the following prophecy and vision, which more fully explained to him the emblem he had conversant. This was such a sleep as fell on Adam. So, as we can see, we have instances where, indeed, yes, it has prophetic significances at times. But notice here what was said by Inspiring Philosophy as its conclusion from reading Michael V. Fox's commentary. And notice he's also going in the application of in Proverbs, but I wonder if he's read the scholar or commentator on the Genesis, and if that scholar makes the same conclusions.
Based on this, what follows after Adam is put into a deep sleep is something he saw in a vision that God gave him. Namely, he saw himself being divided in half and realized the other half of him was the woman.
Alright, so again, nowhere do we see that it's about that. Nowhere do we see in the text any hint. We just assume that it's always meaning it, but we don't see that there. And in fact, we continue onward. The verbal root from which this noun is derived, radam, describes Jonah's sleep, which was not disturbed even by the roaring seas battering his Tarshish-bound ship. So, all we see, as well as pointed out, that the deep sleep is commonly used of a night's sleep, like in Job 4:13, Job 33, verse 15, and Proverbs 19:15, which I wonder if he read that one concerning where that's at, and at its application there in Proverbs. The point is that just because it uses that phrase of tardema for deep sleep doesn't automatically mean it's always related to some sort of prophecy or some sort of communication with God that's on a special way where a vision is shown. There's just no hint of that concerning that in this text.
Working it with the man. So if the marriage union in relationship between man and woman is described in archetypal and metaphorical language, we should expect the same rules to apply to man's relation to God and how he was made. The text says man was formed, dust of the earth, with breath of life, and he becomes a living being. First, Walton notes we need to remember the act of forming is not necessarily a material act. Some passages say God formed events to take place, that he formed seasons, the emotions and inclinations of the heart, the nation of Israel, and a corrupt administration is said to form misery in people.
So, this is something to keep in mind, that the Hebrew that is being used here, we're going to take a look here in the Bible. We'll go to Genesis chapter 2. I'm going to go to verse 7. Formed is the text, yatsar, which means to mold as like a potter does. So it's taken something that exists and then molds of it. And apparently, according to from what I'm seeing on the side, Josephus at one point comments and says that it's like of red earth, macerated or mixed with water. So much like clay, which is interesting enough. Because what was it? I think we go to that actually in Genesis 2:7 in Matthew's commentary. That, let me see, because this is where it would be interesting for people like Inspiring Philosophy, because knowing he does like citing Heiser and Walton. On page 196, we read that Egypt in Mesopotamia also depicted men as made of clay, sometimes mixed with blood derived from a slain god. See Genesis 1 through 11 in ancient literature. So there we have an instant that this can then be something that's in that ancient Near Eastern context, that's referring to an actual being made and formed. Not like, okay, something that just instantaneous, either we're just creating out of nothing, but rather that God is formed from something that is already there. So let's continue onward.
Even when the Hebrew word for forming is about material creation, it doesn't necessarily mean a miraculous event.
But in the case of a human being being made, there's a context there, like the passages that you provided here. Jeremiah 1:5. Let's hold up, let me get back here. So we go to Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. So concerning the issue there, of course, this is probably where some people would differ, because I know I had one argument with a Reformed brother on this. I would still consider that as something that would be considered a miracle, and whether you would think it or not, there's your issue. But this is different than just simply forming it from something that is there, then with the human beings already having done the procreation process, and then God having some sort of intervention into it. We're talking about something that is completely not involved by man at all. It is simply through the dirt that God uses to form man. That in of itself, forming from man instead of through what we know in the process of sexual reproduction, that itself is a bit of a miracle. So I don't think you can use something like this passage to try to suggest that any instance of forming or yatsar means nothing miraculous. So let's continue.
Given what we have already seen as the aim of Genesis 1 and 2, a material formation is unlikely the explanation the authors are getting at with the formation of Adam, and an archetypal understanding is probably more likely.
I would agree that it's an archetypal, but it's also literal. That would be my case. But anyways, I just want to point that out before we continue.
Next, the preposition from is not actually in the Hebrew of Genesis 2. The actual text would read, God yatsard man, dust of the earth. So in reality, there is no direct claim man was formed from dust. The text really seems to be saying, God yatsard man, who is dust of the earth. Being of dust is a common archetypal theme for humans used to represent their mortality. Genesis 3:19 says, For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Man is dust currently, and will return to dust at death, since we lost access to the tree of life.
However, I can accept all this and point out that yes, that is what D was pointing out, is their mortality. I don't know really of any Christian, even in terms of scholarship, that would deny that that's definitely the key point of this. In fact, let's go to Genesis 3:19 here in the commentary. Concerning the issue of from to dust you will return, Adam's death is portrayed by the dreadful wordplay on his creation as essential physical constitution as the dust, a par of the ground, Adamah. His return will be from whence he came. Adam will become once again Adamah, ground. Death is exactly what God had forewarned and what the serpent had denied. Death comes by the reversal of the man's God-given state, that is, a living being. This reversal is the deterioration of the body that will return to the dust from which it was made, hence Job 10:9, Psalm 104 verse 29. The inner elements of the structure are introduced by parallel conjunctions, key, rendered as usual in most versions, the NIV, the NASV, or NASB, NAB, NJPS, and the NJB. But the second occurrence has sometimes been taken as emphatic. Indeed, dust you are. Dust you are always overcomes the progress of medicine and the ingenuity of cosmetology. Every open casket proves it so. So concerning that, that's pages 253 to 254. Sorry for not putting the theological discussion banner on as I have set this. So again, I don't think we can say that there's a problem with the idea that it's an archetype view. But we must also be very informed here and look at it much more closely and see that it's not just a mere archetype view, but rather it's a view that is literal as well in light of context, because as we see, it says, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So that helps add to the polemic that points out you are dust, or you are a par, you are from the ground, and to the ground you shall return. So again, I'm still trying to figure out how, because Inspiring Philosophy is a good guy, and I was actually one people, because I remember he said he was start going into Old Testament once he was done with a few videos. I'd recommended him some resources to go to concerning this kind of stuff to help look more into it. And so far, this definitely doesn't look like the kind of stuff that I suggested or helped him out with, except with the exception of Heiser. So,
the text of Genesis 3 is pretty clear. It was access to the tree of life that made man immortal, not something inherent in our own biology that we lost. As Trygve Medinger says, however we choose to understand Genesis 2:7, it is clear that the wording does not imply eternal life, immortality. This is only to be obtained by eating from the tree of life. Or, as Joshua John Van E notes, first, before the fall, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden did not possess the living forever attached to the tree of life. It was possible for them to die. Their bodies were susceptible to natural death. Second, because of the possibility offered by the tree of life, Adam and Eve were not doomed to die until after their disobedience concerning the tree of knowledge. Thus, human death is a result of sin. Also, the Bible uses the metaphor for dust to describe all of humanity. Being of dust is a common way to denote human mortality. Job 10:9 even says he was made like clay. But obviously Job was not ignorant on how babies were made. Being made from clay or dust was a common way to describe humanity in the ancient Near East. In other words, it is understood as a basic idiom to denote one is mortal. Being made from dust denoted a statement of identity, not a scientific claim, which is why man is called dust directly in Genesis 3:19. Paul.
Okay, but again, I don't see how, because it then says that, then therefore we must assume that they would think of this like some kind of hyperbole. Like, that has to really be explained and laid out with actual evidence instead of just taking a text and making assumptions on it, instead of actually demonstrating from it in the exegetical format. Anyways.
Paul even teaches a similar notion in 1 Corinthians 15. In explaining Christ's resurrected body, he compares it to Adam's body, the type of body we all have now, which is corruptible and mortal, and must be changed to a new form of our body that we will receive, and it will be immortal and imperishable. So Paul seems to teach Adam did not have an immortal body like Christ. The implication Paul is telling us, as Van E notes, is that Adam, as created, needed a change to inherit the kingdom of God. Next, despite the way the English reads, the Hebrew phrase for breath of life doesn't actually appear anywhere else in the Hebrew scriptures. So the only context we have is Genesis 2 for what this phrase is supposed to mean. So far, we can see we have a claim that God yetsared man, dust of the earth, then breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living nephesh. Given the archetypal language used to describe the marriage union, man's relationship to his wife, the idiomatic nature of dust, and the aim of Genesis 1 and 2 being about the functions of the cosmos and humanity, the aim of this verse is probably the same. Richard Hess notes the word nephesh can have multiple meanings, but typically represents the vitality of a person or one's desire to live. He notes the Hebrew of Leviticus 17:11 is written in a way that the nephesh describes that element of the person that chooses life, seeking it and experiencing it. In other words, when talking about a person, the nephesh is often used to describe their purpose for living or what drives them to experience life. In Genesis 2, the message seems to be that God gives man his reason for living and purpose to be alive. God calls mortal men and breathes into them a new purpose and reason for living. This might also be what Paul was indicating in his epistles. In 1 Timothy 2 it reads, "For Adam was..."
So, we see in essentially this whole thing where, you know what? I'm just gonna let him finish off this on this last part.
But here, Paul seems to be talking about God spiritually forming people. So when Paul references the formation of Adam, he might also be referring to how God spiritually formed Adam by giving him a new purpose or vitality to live. This would make sense with what happens to Adam next. He is placed in the garden and given new functions and tasks, elected by God to aid in bringing order to the cosmos. Then we are told man is not functioning properly without a woman. So God shows Adam that Eve is the other half of him, and the two become one flesh, metaphorically speaking, in being the first priests of creation. The whole chapter itself is best understood as a sequel to Genesis 1. God ordered the cosmos, and then in Genesis 2, selects a sacred space in the midst of the cosmos to commune with man. God gives the man a purpose and desire to live, and establishes that woman is his necessary equal, establishing the first ordained marriage under God. These archetypal patterns are meant to represent how all humans relate to each other and to God. However, humans and God were not alone in the garden.
So this is now where we're going to get, I guess, the sequel to be brought about later, where I assume it's going to then talk about the whole deception, which I hope he doesn't fall in for the, the serpent seed garbage that praise I am that I am affirms. And Zachary makes a good point. IP is great, and I would agree he's in fact one of my influences in apologetics and to trying to do this whole kind of thing on YouTube. But according to Zachary, he says, quote, but sometimes he does a lot better in philosophy than he does hermeneutics, it seems. And I would agree. There are times that he's, especially now that he's getting into Old Testament issues, is making some sort of hermeneutical flaws. And I think it's because of some of the studies that he's gone into and hasn't figured out how to get some of the most sound ones, and to remember to have that theology and not to simply just try to do what some people try to do, and that is to try to think as if they almost didn't have much theology when trying to go into these things. They think that somehow that removes the bias, even though that still keeps some form of bias. Now, John D. Currid and we're going to start in page 51 here of the Biblical Theological Introduction to the Old Testament. So we read here, let's see, where do we start concerning the actual human being creation? All right, so let's just start here. And it's still page 51. Humans are not merely created in the image of God, but are also to act like Him. It is a matter not merely of character, but of function and activity. In Genesis 1-2, we see that mankind is to imitate God in three ways. To set the stage, Genesis 1:2 describes the state of the earth as formless emptiness. In the first days of creation, God subdues the fall. Okay, so no, that was actually the wrong one. Because I thought I saw one where he did say that he's talking about the actual creation of human beings. But no, because remember, this is indeed just about a general sort of thing we're dealing with here. But no. All I know is that it does actually reference briefly where Adam and Eve are created actual beings. And concerning their whole thing, I would believe that Dr. Currid would be affirming the position that I would affirm as well. As would, again, Dr. Matthews, as we had pointed out earlier. And there's several other commentaries that I'm sure we can go to on this, not just specifically the old expository ones that are out there, but even some of the more newer ones that are there. So far we have taken a look at a couple of videos, but I want to just wrap up here on this one from Inspiring Philosophy here. Because Brandon Tyler is saying in the chat that think IP does great hermeneutics, and I thought he had a solid argument. The problem is, and this is why, let me see, of course I'm going to still have it. Let me just interact, and where the problem is. He seems to suggest that it only can have like some sort of non-literal and strict archetype based kind of role. However, the problem with that is, in light of what he had said concerning Adam and Eve. Now, notice what he said about Adam here and the wordplay that's being used. Listen carefully, because this is why Inspiring Philosophy refutes himself here at this point of the video.
Is wordplay on Ish, which means man, because Isha was taken from Ish. This doesn't directly mean Adam and Eve were not real people. I've already argued I think they were real people.
So, just because something's an archetype, as even Dr. Walton notes, just because they're an archetype does not mean they were never real people. So, those are things we have to keep in mind. It's not about just simply whether or not that they were archetype, therefore this. You can be an archetype and you could still be real. Just like you can be an archetype and this literally happened and this really happened in the way that it has been described, as well as recognizing that if you have a supernatural worldview, the idea of Adam being formed from the dust and Eve formed from the side should be no problem to the Christian who believes the miracles occur and has a supernatural worldview instead of a naturalistic, materialistic, atheistic worldview. And to me, I think that's where I sort of have doubts and worries about Inspiring Philosophy concerning this. Alright, so that's my whole thing. And honestly, I wish Inspiring Philosophy the best of luck during his time going over these issues in Old Testament studies, because this is the part where I'm, worried that he's going to start having slip-ups and fall into apostasy. One of the things I hope he doesn't fall into is that the idea that Moses didn't exist, or that Moses didn't write the Torah in any way, shape, or form. That would be when I'm starting to have some problems and doubts with Inspiring Philosophy. So hopefully he doesn't go down that route. But anyways, yeah, I'll be keeping some prayers in for our good buddy there. It's been a while since we've even had a conversation as well, so, wish him luck in his ministry, and I wish him luck during that until now, and as well as in the future. Anyways, point being, thank y'all for tuning in. This has been a episode of Theological Discussion. And hope y'all have a great day or great night. It's nighttime anyways. I'm going to try to study a bit and get some more reading in before I got to hit the hay and get some bed rest, because it is a bit early. So, now I didn't say, Brandon, I didn't say that the whole thing of Genesis 1 and him trying to say that this thing, archetype, is apostate. I'm just talking about if he thinks that Moses didn't write the Torah or any of these other things. Those would be issues where, trust me, I've seen it happen. That's where they start getting into apostasy, is that when they start there, then they start denying the deity of Christ and all these other things. But anyways, as I said, that's the end of the show, so I'm gonna head out. Y'all take care. Y'all can follow me on Discord if y'all want. I'm gonna add the links a bit later. So until then, this has been RC Apologist. Take care.